Good day everybody, and welcome to the Audio Couple, and welcome to our channel. Well, today I'm excited as always to share with you actually my review of the Classe Delta Pre and also the Classe Delta Mono amplifiers. And quite, how can I say, a high-end product, but they definitely differentiate themselves on a couple of performance levels, and I'll share with you, more related to their performance later in the video. But please, I think the important thing is that I want to inform, our audience out there as to, if it's a good decision to purchase these type of high-end, let's call it devices or equipment, because they are quite expensive and they, well into the, let's call it the high-end territory. But I think there's definitely some points of differentiation which will inform your decision to make a decision to purchase this equipment as well. Look, it was always good to audition the equipment first before you buy them, if you can. But also, look, I actually went through a whole procedure to make sure that, especially on the sound quality, that I've got good benchmarks to, judge the sound against, and also to ensure what is the sound signature of the actual power amplifier, but then also what is the sound signature of the pre-amplifier, and then finally also to establish, okay, as a combination, what is their sound signature and how do they actually, if there's a synergy between the preamp and the power amplifier, if they are used as such. Look, I think that a lot of people won't just buy the mono blocks. It will always be a combo with the preamp, of course, and the mono blocks. But it's always also important, if you want to team up the power amps maybe with a different preamplifier, like for instance a tube or a valve based design, you can also get then insights into what is the actual performance of the power amplifiers and how do they treat the signal and what is their sound signature, and then of course also the preamp, if you are interested in just purchasing the preamp because maybe it's versatile or that you enjoy some of the functionality in the preamp. But I must say there's definitely synergies in the combination, what I mean using the Classe preamp with the two mono blocks. So maybe let's then start just quickly. I'll first spend some time on the power amplifier, some lineage related to that, some previous, because of course Classe started in the 1980s with their products and very well-known products, a Canadian-based company. I won't go into all their details, but what I can do is that related to the power amplifier, I'll show you some lineage, and also that I was privileged enough to listen to a few of these, let's call it mega designs of them, or truly high-end equipment, and then we'll spend a lot of time on the preamp to discuss more of its features, because the preamp is not just about the actual sound signature or sound quality, but it's also about the versatility or flexibility and the inputs, etc. And then finally we'll go back to the power amplifiers and discuss a bit more related to the features of the power amplifier or the design considerations as well. So yes, so first of all, I used the deltas, the mono blocks, in my surround setup, where I've actually got the Duntech Sovereigns deployed, these large floor standers. I actually compared them to the Mark Levinson 432 stereo power amplifier, so just to have a comparison, related to sound signature. Although the Mark Levinson is a bit of a dated design now, I think that the Mark Levinsons are still, well considered, and it's because it's a known quantity to me, so I wanted to benchmark it to an amplifier that I'm used to. There, the basic signature was that it's a very full sound. It's definitely a high-end sound because of the dynamics. It's got micro and macro dynamics. It emanates from a very black background. What I mean is the background noise or signal to noise ratio of the amplifiers are extremely high. They wide bandwidth, a lot of bass slam, and then very clear tops, and extended. I think there's few amps that can match that, bass extended, if it's recorded as such, of course. But the only caveat was that in the upper mid-range, it sounded a bit forward, the Classe presentation. But I'm quite used to that type of presentation from Classe, because it's a bit of their sound signature. I would say the first things that comes to mind is the openness of their sound, the slam in the mid-bass, but then a bit of a pronunciation in the upper mid-range. but still they contain the timbre, which is very important, you know, the naturalness of the voices, etc. And this is how I then perceived the Classes, the mono blocks. Very good, very detailed, high-end sound for sure. But if you compare them to the Mark Levinsons definitely a bit more darker presentation. You know, the mid-range is a bit more retreated into the loudspeaker, where I would say the Classes project the mid-range quite well, and it actually makes their sound signature quite interesting for me. It had a quite an interesting and distinct signature, but still containing a lot of the energy in the music, which is important. So then what I did was, with the preamp, we first connected the preamp into my stereo setup, where I used the JBLs, you know, the M2s for critical listening. And yeah, my stereo system, of course, this is where you can really then discern type of dissect music, if you like, or just sit back and listen to the music, enjoy, let's say, the big sound stage and a fullness of the sound. So here, when I introduced it to the stereo setup, I got more or less the same impression. What I've immediately realized, and it's funny enough, but it's in a preamp, is the high degree of stereo separation. Immediately I heard this, you know, large stereo separation, but also again the slam in the mid bass, fullness to the sound, and a full bass without sounding, you know, not controlled, extended top frequency, nice and open, very nice mid range, dynamic as well. But again, the bit of you know, upper mid range, that's a bit more, how can I say, accentuated in the frequency domain. But all in all, a very nice preamp. We'll come back to the preamp just now. And actually the performance from a preamp were actually better than what I expected. So excellent performance from the preamp. But now, if we can just turn our attention back to the power amps, because I just want to talk a bit more about the background related to the power amplifiers. A couple of years back, was quite fortunate to also listen to the CAM 600s, but also to the Classe Omegas, and the Omegas was quite impressive design. It's these tower type of design, over-engineered, you know, from the moment you actually opened. They actually came in nice flight cases, aluminium flight cases, and from first impression you know that you're dealing with a high-end amplifier. Also the sound signature was more or less, as I explained, that I got from the Delta monos, very similar. So the very similar Classe type of signature sound, but of course this time around I think they've even improved on it, and their mission was really to create the perfect amplifier, and maybe perfect preamplifier, and I think they came close, but again, maybe let's discuss that in more detail. But if we then just consider quickly the lineage of the Classe power amplifiers, look, in the middle 80s they launched with the Classe M1000s monoblocks, quite the excellent design. I never had the opportunity to listen to them, but a few of my audiophile friends had the opportunity, and all of them commented that it's excellent sound, and it compels you to actually invest into Classe, into especially the power amplifiers. So again, the Classe M1000 monos, also you know, these industrial type of design, over-engineered type amplifiers. Then in the early 90s, they introduced the Omicron monos, also very I say high quality design, everything you know, towards a high-end product. Then I think late 1990s, maybe early 2000s, they introduced the Classe Omegas, and there was one or two different versions of these, but yes, as explained earlier, everything just high-end about these amplifiers. And then they were basically replaced with the Classe CAM 600s, part of the CA series, and that's where they started with the Delta chassis on the monoblocks. And then of course there's where also they started with the ice tunnel or the tunnel type of design to get rid of heat from the amplification. And then of course now we're looking at the Delta monos, and quite impressive design. Always these mono type configurations of them was between, this is now from Classe, between 300 watts per channel on 8 ohms, or closer to around 600 watts per channel on 8 ohms. It's funny, but Classe always played with these two figures, around 300 watt RMS per channel on 8 ohms, or around 600 watts per channel on 8 ohms. So what you can establish from that is very powerful amplifiers, and they are capable of driving, I would say, any domestic and even a professional type of loudspeaker. Very over-designed, they can deliver a lot of current, and this was also the design approach with the Delta monos. Though it's just a 300 watt that they can deliver, it's more of a high current design. I think other key feature, and which would of interest of a lot of other audiophiles, is that these, and I've chosen specifically the monos because they are capable of around 35 watts of pure Class A into 8 ohms, which I think is definitely a bonus. And for most of the time, and for a lot of the listening that I've done, you know, I've stayed within the 35 watt limits on the actual displays. And I'm, you know, well known for playing a bit louder than normal, because I don't just want to listen to music in certain instances, but I also want to physically feel the music, if I can say that. And because I have these full range type of loudspeakers, you sometimes want to play it a bit louder than normal levels and enjoy the music in that way. But of course, it's not always the case that you want to go full blown. So even on lower levels, a full detailed sound. And I must say, at any listening level, the deltas don't change their sound signature. Maybe if we can just quickly take our attention then back to the preamplifier. You know, you've got plenty of inputs, both single-ended and balanced. And just one thing to keep note is that both the monos and the pre is actually fully balanced design. So if you want to get the best out of the performance, yes, it's to go via balanced connectors, and that's what I've done, except for the phono stage where I went normal RCA. So yes, I tested the phono stage, and what is actually quite versatile in this preamp is that you can actually configure it single-ended, but you also can take it one step up and actually configure one of the XLR inputs to a balanced input for the phono stage. So it's just a configuration, of course, within the preamp that you select that, and then you can actually have a balanced phono stage input to the phono stages. What is nice about it, it is configurable. You know, you can set up load impedances, which is very important for moving coil, but also for moving magnet, and you can also set up the capacitance on the moving magnet side, which is also important if you want to match your phono stage with the, let's call it, the capabilities of your moving magnet cartridge, but then also the load impedances that you can have related to the phono stage. And look, you can set it up from, I think it's about 7.5 ohms all the way to 1 kilo ohms, which is quite a wide selection load impedances, and that can also just contribute to improved performance. Yeah, so I connected a moving coil cartridge to the unit, and I've done all of my phono testing with that. Actually, it was rated around 100 ohms load impedance, but when I played around with the settings, I realized that the 330 ohm load impedance actually gives me the most balanced sound, or let's call it the most dynamic sound and presentable type of listening experience. But this just shows again that sometimes you actually expect a certain load impedance, or somebody actually specify impedance, and that by just playing around with the actual settings can actually improve the performance. Then if we can just quickly go into the actual DAC performance, so they make use of the premium AKM DAC. I think it adds to the performance of the actual preamp and to the versatility, and it was quite quickly to get the DAC up and running. I just connected my USB connection from my laptop, and yes, I must say quite a good performance from the built-in DAC as well. Although I must mention that from my benchmark DAC, my external DAC, I got a bit more of a balanced approach to the actual sound. But that's maybe just me. I think a lot of people will prefer the built-in DAC. It's definitely good enough, and it's definitely a premium DAC and high-end category. So yes, excellent quality from there. Then a bit more about the sound. As mentioned previously, I think it's a synergy to the power amplifiers. It definitely assists. And the moment I actually introduced the preamp together with the power amp, the slight pronunciation in the higher mid-range, that disappeared, because the sound tend to get more of a fullness when you actually combine the preamp and the power amp. And maybe that's part of the preamp design. So I just want to share slides related to the specifications, because the actual specifications, although very important, especially also in the high-end category, I think for me what is important, specifications must always translate into performance, because if it's just specs that people are running you know, towards improving specs, you tend to lose the aspect of the musicality, or that the device actually should reproduce music. It's not all just about improving the specs or having the lowest distortions or the lowest intermodule distortion, all these type of figures, but it must then translate into something meaningful. And I think that is a balance that Classe got right with the Delta series. So for instance, if we just talk, I spoke to you guys about the channel separation immediately, although Nimrod, look, you've got two mono blocks, and of course the channel separation should be good. But I think when I just listened to the actual preamp, the actual way that the preamp was constructed, it's funny, but the stereo separation is quite good. And of course, yes, people will tell me, but Nimrod, inside it is actually two mono preamps, which is just in one chassis. But it must be also said that the channel separation impressed me. It could be due to design and the critical component layout, etc. inside the preamp. It could be because of the overall power supply, etc. But I must say that the stereo separation was excellent. Then if we just consider a few other things, I think the input impedance is quite standard. The output impedance very low for balanced at around 50, for single-ended around 50 ohms, and for the XLR at around 200 ohms, which I think is also standard, but on the lower side, which is better. I think the lower the better. But they also use the output impedance somewhere to also change the voicing of the preamp. But I think that is also quite a good figure to be at around 200 ohm. Then maximum output level, I don't think there's anything to be said about that. It's quite capable of driving the actual mono blocks, but it's also will also be capable of driving any other type of power amps that you then configure to the Delta Pre if required. Then regarding the frequency response, I mean that you can see is quite wide. So the -3 dB point, half power points, is basically from 1 Hertz all the way to 2 megahertz. So you can see it's extremely wide, and of course you want to ensure that your frequency response in the 20 Hertz to 20 kilohertz span is actually excellent and very linear. Classe went over and above, and the frequency response of the preamp, once all the digital circuitry in the signal path is disabled, is actually quite wide. And you actually have this functionality inside the preamp to disable all the digital circuitry from the analog signal path, and then you've got this what they call line stage bypass mode, and you've got this extremely wide frequency response. And I think that translated into this, how can I say, a very desirable type of sound that you get from the Delta Pre and the combination of the two. So it's very fleet-footed. It's quick to the response on the input signal. It's got this fullness in the bass, but not over-exaggerated. It's got a grip on the bass, but also not overly mechanical. So very a musical sound, but yet if you just look at the specifications on this preamp, is just over and above, and they went beyond. And this translated into a very, I would say, desirable type of sound. You know, a lot of projection in the mid-range, but very well done. And then there is still some slight, I would say, exaggeration in the upper mid-range. But they basically balance that to ensure that they don't impact the timbre of the voices. You know, the voices always stayed well contained, I would say. So the character of the voices remained very natural. But you've got this slight projection of the mid-range, and then maybe the upper mid-range still a bit more pronounced than normal. And then related to some of the other specifications, I think everything is just well done. And then just to get quickly back to the phono stage, remember I tested it with a moving coil design. This moving coil design is actually from the late 80s, early 90s, an excellent cartridge from Japanese origin. So this cartridge, I chose this cartridge because it's got a bit of more of a lean presentation, but very accurate. What I mean is if the recording is well produced, and you've got a good pressing on the record, it's capable of producing very dynamic type of sound, and also still it draws you into the recording. So I think it was a good match, and I'll share with you guys a picture on this cartridge, phono cartridge, and also a bit around the specifications. But what you can also see from the slide that I'm sharing with you guys is that there's a lot of settings related to moving magnet, you know, all the capacitance, the load capacitance figures. But then if you just go one step lower, you just progress to the moving coil low output settings all the way from 7.5 ohm to 1 kilo ohm, and as mentioned previously, the 330 ohms. Funny, I wouldn't have that setting. I got the best performance from the moving coil cartridge, and then also you get high output moving coil cartridges, and very important. There is a few in the market that I know of, and the load impedance is basically 47 kilo ohm, which is similar to what you typically do for your moving magnet type of designs. Then related to the gain, I think for moving magnet around 41.5, which I think is fine for a moving magnet. On the moving coil part, they mention something like 60 dB gain, a standard across the industry that they use more or less this type of gain figures. Look, for the moving coil cartridge that I fitted was very low output, I think below 2.5 millivolts in fact, and yes, it was still well matched, the gain, etc. But I had to take the preamp all the way to about 0 dB setting on the volume to get a good volume out of it. But it wasn't an issue at that level, at where the actual gain or attenuating setting were at unity gain or at position 0. There was still, good enough gain so that you can get a good impact, let's say, from the audio. The Delta was also fitted with a headphone jack. Again, maybe I won't say it will compete with all the dedicated headphone amplifiers out there, DAC headphone amplifiers that you get these days, but the performance are really above average, definitely above average, and you get good sound reproduction from this phono head amp. Yeah, so the headphone output will produce about 540 milliwatts, just under a watt, which is enough for most designs, and the output impedance is also quite low at 6.8 ohms. So typically also they mention that the output of 540 milliwatts, which is just above half a watt, can be produced into a 32 ohm load, which is also quite standard for most headphones, around 32 ohms. And then if we can consider the actual USB input, actually the preamp has got two inputs, a USB-B, which is the back of course, and the USB-F, which is the front. So if you look at the actual formats that's a support from the front, it's from 44.1 kilohertz all the way to 96 kilohertz. So that is typically for your mobile smartphones to support basically their sampling rates, which I think is sufficient. And then from the back, the USB back input, you can see that they then support quite a wide variety of sampling rates, all the way from 32 kilohertz all the way to 384 kilohertz. And then you can also see that they actually natively supports DSD, and DSD all the way to 256. But for DSD, you actually need to install the drivers for on Windows, the specific Classe drivers to enable you to convert that. You can also do DSD via PCM or DOP, and that then supports all the way to DSD 64, which I think is also sufficient. Then you can also notice that we spoke about that earlier related to the fixed Ethernet or the WAN connection at the back. It can also enable you to do streaming, and that is then also the formats, the file formats or the streaming formats that is supported via the Ethernet connection at the back. And then of course it also supports your normal SPDIF connections via coaxial or optical. And what is important, it's also via the balanced AES or EBU type of interface at the back. It also supports the Philips Sony digital interface at the back. Yes, then I think that we can actually take our attention then back to the power amplifiers, and I just want to share a bit more about the actual power amplifiers with you, related to the actual overall design, but then also some of the features and the sound quality, etc. So if we quickly consider the monoblocks, of course, there's over-engineered, very solid power supplies with the custom-made toroid transformers. They've got the capability of running around 35 watts into pure Class A, and then the moment you go beyond that, up to 300 watt into Class AB mode. But I must say also one important thing from the 35 watts that is capable, even with me that tend to play slightly louder than most. I think the 35 watt Class A was actually more than ample for most of my listening experiences. So it was only in very few occasions where I pushed the amplifier beyond the 35 watts, which sounds actually odd, but definitely I've even seen the same on the Dantec Souverains, which comes at about 90 dB efficiency. But it was quite interesting that you can actually get quite good sound pressures from about 35 watt output of the amplifiers, but of course they're capable of doing more. And of course this design was actually a bit more a current type of design. What I mean is a high current capabilities of these amplifiers, where they tend to focus a bit more on the current delivery than just having this high wattage outputs. But as previously stated, the Classe designs typically between 300 watts to all the way up to 600 watt, but believe you me, this 300 watt is actually more than capable of driving most loudspeakers out there. We can talk about the fully balanced. Yes, it's a fully balanced design. So yes, if to get the utmost performance, it's best to make use of the balance or XLR inputs. Again, the FuroTech input terminals, both on the balanced and RCA, this single-ended inputs, and then of course the radium-plated speaker terminals with the torque adjustment or torque guard speaker connectors. So you'll insert a spade, let's say spade connector in there, and you can just use the torque to torque the terminal or the spade connector to the actual terminals. And I must say, I've said it before in a few other amplifiers, I think that the torque capability of that connectors are really, for me, the best that I've seen in terminal speaker terminal connections. Then other thing is, yes, I think this luxurious anodized look of the amplifiers, look, it's beautiful. I think it matched well with my JBL M2 loudspeakers, and late at night when there's just a dim background light, they actually look marvelous, superior, and just you've got this feeling of luxury, which I commend them to. Then of course the custom made let's call it analog meters in the front, the VU meters, and they illuminated of course in a nice soft color, that gives it quite a pleasant look and feel, let's call it that. And they're very responsive, and actually the circuitry behind this is purely digital. So the design criteria from Classe was that the meters, the analog meters, shouldn't interfere with the output circuitry of the amplifier, and of course I think they got it right. Then I think we spoke about the tunnel. They've got this specific tunnel because the amplifier actually operates in pure Class A. You have to get rid of that heat, and there's of course a fan from the front that forces the air out to the back. Yes, for me, there was no impact from the fan. I couldn't really hear the fan. I actually had to stop the music and then stand up from my seating position to actually try and perceive the fans. This is as how low noise they generate. It's very low noise, and for me, it wasn't actually an issue. I enjoyed the amplifiers. Look, I must also state that, look, from the moment you hit the power button and the amplifiers start to function, you get the same sound signature. I would say within 2 to 3 minutes of the amplifier in operation, you get this constant good performance, excellent performance from the amplifiers, and that's also a plus, and you can actually judge from the back. There's a constant flow of warm air emanating from the back of the amplifier, and that's basically to get rid of the heat. And for me, even when I played it at quite loud levels, the heat that emanates from the back of the amplifier when I tested it is similar. So it actually regulates the amplifier quite well. And the plus for me is that it's consistent performance across the way that I implemented the amplifiers. And if you think about a studio type application as well, is that they can use these then in a variety of locations within the studio. So it adds to the flexibility of the amplifiers, but also in a home environment where you sometimes don't have a lot of rack space, or you have to mount it near to the back wall or something like that. That adds to the versatility. Then if we just quickly look at the specifications, and I know it's a bit hectic for a lot of people to look at specifications. They don't always know what it means, but for a lot of people that is more on the technical side, it's actually important. But for me, of course, specifications should always translate into something audible, or did it make effect on the sound signature, or why did they implement or have such a tight specification on the actual unit or design criteria. But if you just look at the frequency response, again, quite a wide frequency response from 1 Hz all the way to 650 kilohertz, which is exceptional. Of course, they do this to make sure that within the audible frequency response of around 20 Hz, I would say a bit lower for me, around 15 Hz or something like that, all the way to 20 kilohertz, that you have a very flat and even frequency response. And I think that's why they have this extra wide frequency response, but also that assists with the agility of the amplifier. And remember, music is not just a sine wave, it's a complex sine wave. And to actually reproduce these complex waveforms, you have to have this wide type of frequency design approach that Classe have taken. Then we spoke about the output power, around 300 watts into 8 ohms, which is sufficient. It doubles that into 4 ohms, which shows that there's a solid power supply in there, and then it goes all the way into to around 1000 watts into 2 ohms. Related to distortion, I'm not going to talk a lot about that. Very low distortion, definitely, and you won't be able to perceive that. But it didn't translate into a clean sound. Yes, of course, a very clean palette, very clean type of sound, but not clinical, which is very important. And then, if we just look at the input impedance, around 82 kilo ohms, which is quite in the middle, I would say. A lot of amplifiers are about 50 kilo ohms input impedance, all the way to about 100 kilo ohms, which on 82 they're somewhere in between. On the voltage gain at 29 dBs, very standard. Anything from around 28 to 32 is acceptable. But for me, at 29, very similar to what Classe has always been used in the power amplifiers. And for me, very important when I actually need to match it with the top amplifiers or other amplifiers in my M2 combination, where I need specific amplifiers to drive the bass and others to drive the tops. In this configuration, I used them both to drive the in 2 configurations, the one when they drive the bass and then the other configuration where they drive the tops, and very even-handedly across the frequency response in this application. But maybe again to mention that they're very agile and a slight exaggeration of the higher mid-range, but not something to be concerned about. I think it adds to the pleasure of the music and to actually project the mid-range, which is a very important component of your audio, into your listening area. Then regarding intermodulation distortion, very important spec, but nothing to be concerned about there. And then I just want to talk about the damping factor. Damping factor, very important in power amplifiers, is the ability, the higher the figure, the better. Typical figures is anything from about, I would say, 50 damping factor all the way to about 1500 in very severe cases. But what you've seen at 700, it's very high, but not extremely high. And I think it's a balancing trick between having an amplifier that sounds controlled, but either too mechanical. I've realized if the damping factor is too high, the amplifier tends to sound a bit more mechanical, and that's not what you want. At 700, it translates into good speaker control, but still punchy, but not mechanical type of sound that we heard. And of course, you want the damping factor to be as high as possible across the frequency response. Here they have even given it at 1 kilohertz, which is fine. But again, like I mentioned, is these type of specifications translated into good audio quality. And even if you need to be critical, you can still judge the sound to be, still musical, but pushing the envelope related to performance. And then quite hefty, these amplifiers at around just over 44 kgs, which is quite heavy. So basically, most of the weight goes towards the toroid and the actual chassis and a few other components. But yes, quite a hefty amplifier. But of course, this is what you expect because of the, let's call it the linear type of power supply that they've deployed. Now I actually go into the actual performance or the scorecard that I've put together for the 2 components. Let's first go into the preamp. You'll notice from the slide that I've judged the phono stage, the USB back input using the internal DAC. I've also considered the XLR input and then an overall score. So from the phono stage, yes, I got excellent results at around 94%. Very good results from the moving coil cartridge, even with that lean type of presentation on the cartridge, you still got the full sound and a very pleasurable experience and presentation, and that is reflected in the score there. Regarding the internal DAC, it's the AKM, very good performance at 96%. So I think it's well integrated in the way that they execute it together with the sound signature of the Classe. Still very good performance. You can definitely see there it's audiophile territory, or let's call it high-end territory. Very well done there, Classe. Then related to the XLRs, this is where I got the best performance for my type of sound that I enjoyed, coming from my benchmark DAC 3 external DAC or standalone DAC. Of course, they use the Sabre ESS DACs in there, and I just found for my type of sound I could push the envelope. And for a lot of other people that already have external DACs, it will be also comforting to see that when you use the XLR inputs that you can get good performance. And definitely from the XLR inputs you get good performance. And remember that both the preamp and the power amps are fully balanced designs, so you can actually make best use of the pre-power amp combination when you go balanced inputs. Then related to overall sound, I gave the preamp a 96%, which is quite good, you'll notice. And then a lot of people ask me, but Nimrod, how do you get to that 96%? And then I've basically listed the criteria there on the left-hand side, left bottom side. You can judge it. So it's basically the low bass extension, it's low bass control, it's the mid-bass slam, it's mid-range projection, it's basically the timbre of voices, high-frequency extension, high-frequency precision, then evenness of frequency response is very important, and then the overall tone. What was the overall tone or sound signature from the preamp, considering those as a baseline? And then other how can I say, topics that rest on top of this baseline is things like space around instruments or airiness, the sound stage, if they can recreate a believable sound stage, then the layering of instruments and or vocals, or the combination of two, the stereo separation, I did speak about that. It was excellent. The agility of the sound, does it sound agile and very realistic, or does it sound very dead? And then the detail retrieval, or the inner detail retrieval, is also important. And then things like dynamics, the macro dynamics and micro dynamics, and then overall sound impression. And maybe just to highlight it again, these components are very agile but also dynamic. The macro and the micro dynamics, very well done. And then the system is capable of really reproducing a lot of detail, or how can I say, retrieve it from the recordings. Then if we just consider quickly the rating on the power amplifiers, of course it's slightly different because it's not so many features or inputs or capabilities from the amplifier, it's more to actually how to amplify the signal. So there also, if you look at the scorecard for the monos, the audio performance at very high, I think 95%, which for me is very good. The design is close to a 10, it's 99%. I would say the only consideration is maybe the fan. Look, for me personally, the fan wasn't an impact or anything, etc., to be concerned about, but I think maybe for some people it could be a concern, the noise that could be emitted from the fan. But for me it was just versatile, and again, from the high rating, the overall look and feel of the amplifier is really top-notch, luxurious type of design, I must say, very attractive. And then regarding the value, yes, they are a bit expensive, the combo, but I think they definitely in that league, and they play in that league. So it's still, for me, if you have the funds and you want to invest in this type of product, for sure you can go for it. A confident yes. And then overall for the power amplifiers also comes in at around 96%, which is quite good. Then I think it's then now fine to then move over to the overall performance. So this is now where you combine the preamp with the power amplifier, and then I gave the combo a solid 96. And this then translates into outstanding products from the audio couple, and indeed it is an outstanding product. Then I think just as a final, what is there any negatives? And again, I'm very hesitant to talk about any negatives. It's because people then focus on these negatives and it puts them off. But there's so many pluses on this equipment that there's actually, for me, there's no negatives related to the performance of the system, except for the only two that I can highlight. The first is on the wireless remote control, infrared remote control. When I realized when I actually have it higher than the actual component at an angle, it doesn't actually communicate the instructions well, and I had to lower the remote remote control more at the same level than the infrared sensors to get performance from that. So maybe that's something that Classe can work at, is the actual the angle of the infrared remote control, how that functions. They can maybe improve on that, but other than that, the remote control functioning actually quite well. And then lastly, just related to sound, I think because the Duo are capable of retrieving so much detail, it's sometimes that it actually pushes all the detail to the front layer. So the layering of instruments wasn't actually that well executed that I've learned from some other designs. So that's maybe the only negative, that the layering. So where are the instruments placed in the recording venue, or where maybe the recording engineer wanted to pan the actual instruments a little bit in the background, not maybe in the same spatial plane as the vocals, or where there's background singers that they sing a little bit to the background, or they pan it, etc., in the actual recording mix. So a lot of the sound signature, or I call it almost like the palette of the sound, actually were up front. So there wasn't really that very, you didn't have the capability of layering the instruments where they are actually located in the recording. So that was basically the only negative. But don't let that negative statement regarding the layering actually impact your opinion about these equipment. These are really top end equipment, and the sound quality is as close as you can get to perfection. Of course, each person will have his own opinion, but from my opinion, and I've listened to a wide variety of power amplifiers, including the older Omegas, also the Cam 600s. They definitely improved on their previous designs, and their previous designs were already cutting edge, etc. So hats off to Classe. Well designed products, excellent sound signature, excellent performance. The pride of ownership will be extremely high, and these are definitely components that you should consider if you want to make investment into audio. And of course, these components will last you quite so many years with constant and excellent performance. Okay guys, yeah, so welcome back. So now we have Teresa. So I'm also wanting to hear from Teresa, her basically experience with the products, but just before we go into Teresa's experience of the products, I can just maybe inform you that look, on the preamp, even if you use it in your home cinema type of environment, you can actually fit an additional HDMI board. It features both HDMI in and out, so you can basically integrate it in your home cinema area, where you can basically connect a Blu-ray player, or maybe a PlayStation console or something to that on the HDMI inputs, and then also have an HDMI output. So that's just an additional board that you can fit to the unit. But then also Classe is awaiting Rune certification. Maybe that's already been done, but according to the last information, they're just waiting for Rune certification regarding the built-in streaming device. And then that will also add to the functionality of the preamp. But maybe just to take it back to the power amplifiers, remember we first tested them in our home cinema area, where they drive those big Domtech Sovereign loudspeakers, where it's a 4-ohm loudspeaker, but because they've got 7 drivers, they are really power hungry. And it was interesting, we never got them out of the 35 watt Class A mode, which was quite interesting. And then the sound signature never changed at any volume, which was also quite a big plus, for us. But then when we moved it to this side, I think that's when
the sound changed, because it's like a complete solution. It was the power amps with the preamp, and and it was like we were listening that night at the music, and I remember I was like mesmerizing with that needles going like, keep following them.
Yes, basically, yes, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, so basically the feedback, it's like feedback from the needles that you get back, how the amplifiers are actually responding to the input signal and driving the loudspeakers. And what we were also noticing from the analog meters, is that how effortlessly and agile they're performing, and it was typically the same as the actual sound impression, is that the loudspeakers were very effortlessly following the input signal, and the amplifiers had these agility and real dynamics to the sound, which were quite impressive. And as mentioned also again by Teresa, is that when the actual preamp and the power amps were combined is when you get actually maximum benefit. But I think as power amps only, they can also be integrated with valve type of preamps or tube designs, and I'm sure you'll also benefit from that, because they are quite transparent, let's call it, I'll use the word transparent, or they're quite responsive to the input signal, and they retain that original dynamics of the recording, you know. And but that's basically it from us. I don't know from your side specific, Teresa, but you can see that Teresa enjoyed the products because of this feedback that we get from you know, the system, but also the sound. It was always for us a special occasion when we fired up the system, you know, switched the power amplifiers on, and then the power amplifier, when you start switching it on, it goes through three stages where it switch on different stages of the power amplifier. So there are 3 distinct relays that you can hear switching inside the units, and that also adds to the overall aesthetics and the pleasing, you know, nature of the amplifier. And it felt like this is now a special occasion for switching on the amplifiers. And each time it was very
heavy as well.
Oh yeah, because of that big that toroid transformer. Apparently there's a kilometer worth of copper wire on those transformers, so they're quite heavy. I think the transformers come in at around only 17 kg. The actual total weight of the amplifier weight is about 44 kg, but if you think about it, the toroid transformer inside there is about 17 kg. So a hefty design, very good design overall, and then together with a Class A mode, but you know, cooling it down, keeping it at a stable temperature, and you can actually hear it from sound signature from the amplifiers. Always clean, nice, stable sound signature. But that's us, guys. I don't know if there's anything else from you, Teresa. But yeah, you can see that even Teresa enjoyed these amplifiers because of the feedback they're given, but also the pleasing sound, etc. But that's us, guys, the audio couple. Thank you for always you know, supporting us. If you want to see more of these videos, please subscribe. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. And then if you want to receive notifications, please hit the bell. But that's us, guys, then, the audio couple. And thank you for your support. Cheers.